She's an award-winning writer, a hunting guide, archery and rifle instructor, keynote speaker, and all-around outdoors woman who encourages you to get outside, hunt, fish, shoot, and savor all that life has to offer. And now, here's your host, Mia Anstine.
Well, hey, hi, hello, you all. Thanks for tuning in. I'm happy to be visiting with you today to share some adventures. And I hope these are inspiring and not intimidating. And that's kind of a preview peek to what we're going to be talking about. But I'm going to share outdoor adventures with you. And today, my guest is writing books, a series about the national parks. And so before we get going, I kind of wanted to just let you know, as always, there are going to be links in the show notes. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see some video pictures of some of the stuff we talk about and so forth. So go ahead and tune in and subscribe over there, but obviously not while you're driving. And I also would like you to please let me know, like message on social media or email. The email address is contact@miaanstine.com. Let me know where you have been and which national park is your favorite. Here, I want to tell you some interesting fun facts about the United States national parks. And so, of course, Yellowstone is probably the most popular, most famous national park that we have here in the US. And it was established in 1872. It's the world's first known geothermal features like Old Faithful. So, the world's first national park that is known for geothermal features like Old Faithful. A lot of the parks also boast diverse wildlife, which is a huge attraction for me. I'm always about the wildlife, wild things, flowers, bugs, birds, all of it. Like it's all good. But parks like the Everglades, they protect rare species like the American crocodile and the Florida panther. So maybe you can head down there. I don't know if anyone is listening, if you've seen a panther. Wow, that would be a little hair raising, a little scary. I don't know. I also want to talk about some of the size extremes. We've got Wrangell. Tell me how to say that. Somebody's got to give me a message. Wrangell, St. Elias in Alaska is the largest with over 13 million acres. And then we have Hot Springs in Arkansas is one of the smallest national parks there is. Unique ecosystems can also be found at the parks, and the parks vary from deserts and Death Valley, which we maybe chat about a little today, to rainforest and Olympic. So you might hear about some of that in our visit with my guest today. And of course, we've got huge Grand Canyons, and geologists are estimating that some canyon layers in some of the parks date back 2 billion years. 2 billion. Isn't that incredible? That's something that when you're outside, do you ever think about how the canyon or the river, how did it meander? How long did it take for it to form the way that it is? Very intriguing to somebody like me. Maybe I should have studied geology. I don't know. I have wondered that over the years. But we've also got Mount Denali, the largest peak in North America, is located in Denali National Park. The most visited park is the Great Smoky Mountain, and it attracts the highest number of annual visitors. Then we have marine parks like Biscayne. And again, tell me if I'm pronouncing these right or wrong, guys. When you're not driving, pull over, send me an email, or message me on social media. But Biscayne and Channel Islands protect vast amounts of marine environment. And then we have international sites. Yes, there are international national parks like Glacier and Waterton in Canada, and they share the International Peace Park designation. Cultural significance. This is something that is local to me. Places like Mesa Verde safeguard ancient Native American cliff dwellings. So, without further ado, disregard my ramblings. Hopefully, they make you laugh a little and share a smile. And then, hopefully, they encourage you to get outside and to savor all the world has to offer. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey friends, if you're looking for premium performance gear for your next adventure, look no further than VOORMI. Their innovative wool technology is perfect for any outdoor activity. And the best part, you can also support the show by shopping through my affiliate link at voormi.com/Mia Anstine. We earn a little commission on your online purchases, excluding sale items, and it's no extra cost to you. Gear up for your next adventure with VOORMI today. That's VOORMI.com/MIAANSTINE. VOORMI.com/Mia Anstine. I also wanted to suggest that maybe as a group, we should try to read some of the series of books that we're going to be chatting about today. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and shoot me a message. Let me know, and we'll together choose which one to read first. And I also wanted to remind you that we currently have a giveaway going on, and this is based on The Hunt, which was the children's book that was written by Stephanie White. And so don't miss out. It's an exclusive giveaway, and to get a copy of the book, The Hunt, you need to subscribe to the Mia Anstine Mac Outdoors newsletter. And if you're already subscribed, shoot me an email. The email address, again, is contact@miaanstine.com. And tell me, what was your favorite part of the episode number 150, which was with author Stephanie White, where she talks about her other books and the book The Hunt. And we'll be giving away a copy of that book. So without further ado, I hope you'll go over and enter that, as well as let me know which book you want to read first out of the series of The Death in the National Parks.
This summer, whether at the range or in the field, WSI Sports Hypertech bamboo tanks, tees, and leggings will have you covered. Visit WSISports.com to support the show and use the affiliate code MACO10 for 10% off your purchase. All products are proudly made in the USA. WSI is bringing back pride in American-made clothing. Again, that code is MACO10 for 10% off your order at WSISports.com.
All right, everybody. I'm happy to have you listening to the show today, and I'm excited to learn because I've been touring some national parks, and an author reached out to me that has a very interesting series, and I wanted to share that with you while I learn about it as well. So, Randy, would you mind introducing yourself to my guests and letting them know who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Randi Minetor. I am the author of 7 books in the Death in the National Park series. Not Yellowstone or Yosemite, those were other people, but most of the other ones. And I'm a professional author who specializes in the national parks and nature.
So when you had mentioned the national parks and you said that I too was looking at the national parks last year for spring break, my daughter and I kind of took a tour through Arizona. We always do whirlwind tours, but we
Mhm.
did go to a couple national parks down there, and we had just looked for points of interest along the way. And what I'm curious about is kind of how you came to want to tour national parks, but also how the books came to be.
Sure. In 1992, my husband and I did a honeymoon road trip. I had never been out west at all. So we flew to Minneapolis, where his parents live, rented a car, and drove through the Badlands and Mount Rushmore, around to Yellowstone, through the Black Hills, into Grand Tetons, and then on the way, came back home. It was the first I had seen the Rocky Mountains, and I just fell in love with the whole thing. And over the course of my career, at that point, I was working at an advertising agency, and the course of my career became, how can I subsidize this need to see all of the national parks and all of the affiliates and so on throughout the national park system. So I managed to swing a deal with my publisher, the Globe Pequot Press, to start writing about the national parks, and happily that has funded our travels and our interest in continuing to plan trips that get us to all of the national parks.
Outstanding. And when you're doing this, I have so many questions. I always do that go through my head. But how did you choose your very first national park? I mean, what was the specific one that you first went to, and then how did it develop from there?
Well, it was, going in order along I-90 essentially was the Badlands was the first one for me. And in the beginning, I really didn't get it. Like, what is this? Why are they protecting this? What am I supposed to do here? And once I caught on, and with my husband's help, because he and his parents did road trips throughout his childhood and adolescence, they went everywhere in the country. So he knew what to do, and a few times said to me, "Get out of the car. You need to, let's go do a hike. Let's go see this beautiful place." And then I finally caught on to what the parks were about. So as we advanced, through Mount Rushmore and Black Hills and so on, I started to understand that the National Park Service protects the most beautiful places in the country for our enjoyment. I mean, it's purely altruistic and incredible. So by the time we got to Yellowstone, um, I could hardly contain my excitement. An elk stuck its head right into our car. We saw bears, all sorts of animals and birds, and it was just joyous. So I got completely hooked.
Completely hooked. I mean, that's something that hooks, I think, most people because we all have such a fascination with wild animals and wild things. When you have started the series of the books, which book was the first book? I mean, because I have like the list of the 7 books, and I know like which ones I want to read, but do I need to read them in a particular order?
No, not at all. My first one was Death in Glacier National Park, which was essentially an assignment from Lions Press. My agent walked me up to an editor at a book expo and said, they're about to they're about to expand the Death series. They had the only one they had at that point at Lions was Death in Yellowstone, written by the extraordinary Lee Whittlesey, and it had sold like mad. So with the centennial of the Park Service coming up in 2016, it sort of dawned on them that, gee, maybe we could do more of these. So I was assigned Death in Glacier National Park, and I had been to Glacier a few years before, so I at least knew what the terrain was, and got a feeling for how truly dangerous it is if you're not behaving yourself, if you're not following the basic rules of being outdoors. And when I started to delve into it, that park had just completed a list of the 264 deaths that had taken place since it was declared a park. And so I had that to start with, and I was able to start doing research really through mostly newspapers, mostly news reports of these events, and to get an idea of why people, um, 2 or 3 people a year in the country, why they die in national parks. So it's a fascinating subject. I mean, the real thing that you realize is that people make the same mistakes, over and over. You see them making that error of not understanding the terrain, not doing the research, not paying attention to what the rangers are telling them and to all the warning signs, marching off into the wilderness with, nothing but a bottle of water and a granola bar. Things like this that, unfortunately end in people's deaths. So, and the more I have explored that through Zion, Death in Zion, Death in Rocky Mountain National Park, Death in the Everglades, the more I see the same kinds of errors over and over.
So when we're looking at the errors, I mean, I teach hunter education, so we teach survival through that. Do most people just not have the knowledge because they haven't been out there? I mean, they're inexperienced and maybe they're not looking up the tips from the park.
Well, a lot of what we see is that people are out of their element. That they're used to what they experience at home. So, a couple of skiers from Minnesota have no real way to understand what the backcountry in Rocky Mountain National Park is going to be like. They come from the plains. There might be a few hills that they ski on in maybe Wisconsin, but then they get down there and they really don't understand the enormity of the terrain for starters, um, the altitude and how that's going to affect them, and how much more tired they're going to be. They also may expect, in one particular instance I have in mind, that this couple also expected that when they got to a shelter that they knew was there, they expected it to be stocked with food and water and firewood. And of course, it was just a lean-to. So there was none of that. There was no way to get warm. They hadn't brought any supplies with them. And this unfortunately led to exposure, which led to hypothermia and so on. And unfortunately, they died. These are the kinds of things that we see a lot of, that people just not understanding what they're getting into, and how the skills they use at home to walk a trail are not going to work at 12,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, with the book series, is it more of let's read an adventure and hear about these hair-raising tales, or are you guys striving to educate outdoors people who maybe we don't want them to be making these mistakes?
There's both. You read the tales, and I've done my best to make them interesting. They're not sensationalized. I'm a journalist, so I'm really trying to just report the facts. And unfortunately, I can't interview these people because they're dead. So that's kind of a an obstacle to being able to truly tell the whole story. But yeah, there's quite a bit of, telling what happened to these people, but there's also a section in the back of every book that is how to stay alive in this park.
Okay.
So that there's all the things about carrying the 10 essentials, which I'm sure you know very, very well. Food, water, extra clothing, shelter, a compass or some way to navigate. I was very excited. I just got my iPhone 16 and it's a satellite phone. That was very exciting, that okay, people can communicate now, even if they're lost in the backcountry.
Yeah, and
And
that's
sec
something that I've seen is people who haven't been to areas where there's not cell service, they think, "Well, I have my phone, I'm fine." And then they get into the mountains and it's like you might have to hike straight up for 2 hours to get a
right.
signal, and they don't understand that or know that they could do that. And so to have that capability with your phone is just that is a phenomenal progress in technology.
Yes. Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's what is one of the things that we discover. There's a group of people, seven canyoneers in Zion National Park, who unfortunately, for lack of cell service in the park, did not get the warning of the flash flood that was just about to come through and drowned all seven of them in a canyon. These are the kinds of things that I know, people rail against the idea of putting up a cell tower in the middle of a national park, but the truth is cell service would save lives. And right now, for a lot of the parks and a lot of the backcountry, we don't have that. So having a sat phone in your pocket is that's a terrific advance. And I'm sure it's going to save lives out there.
Yeah, I imagine that it certainly will, just because of that communication aspect. When I was kind of researching and looking up all your books, you have a lot of other books you've written as well, and you mentioned just now that you're a journalist. In the books, is it built to be entertaining to the reader? I mean, because the first thing that I thought of, because I grew up out in a rural area. I mean, I grew up in the mountains, so things that I think are common sense are probably not common.
Mm.
But I kind of thought of Dumb Ways to Die, and do you kind of write it that way, or is it just strictly news and I'm a journalist and I'm just reporting what has happened? What type of a read am I looking at?
I'm kind of straddling the two worlds of journalism and for lack of a better word, novel writing. I do want to write a good story. So I do my best to do that with the information that I have. Some of them I have a great deal more detail because they've been written about. A lot of people are curious about what could have happened in a particular situation. The one that comes to mind in Glacier is the night of the Grizzlies in 1967, when two different grizzly bears in the same park, 20 miles apart, attacked two young girls who were camping and ate them. Two separate bears had never happened before, but these, in two instances in the same night. And there was tremendous speculation of what could have made this happen. And the end result is it was pure coincidence. But there's a tremendous amount that has been written about that event. So I was able to draw from that and tell a very compelling story. Sometimes there's a lot of information, sometimes there's nothing. There's a couple of guys who disappeared in the 1920s that, there's a picture of them waving and smiling at 1 o'clock, and by 3 o'clock they had completely vanished. And they were never seen again. Nobody ever was able to solve that. And unfortunately, I didn't have access to the records of what the search was like. So it's a short story.
Wow.
Um, yeah, when there's more information, it's available, and I dig through a lot of different kinds of information. Unfortunately, the parks themselves are not that interested in helping me.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, I had the best luck in Acadia National Park, where the staff was very accommodating and said, "You have a right to this information." I've also had parks that completely ignored me and refused to give me anything, even with FOIA requests, that I'm just not able to pull anything. There were a couple of investigations that supposedly the FBI conducted, and when I FOIA'd the FBI, they said there were no files. So it's very hard to know, what really went on in some of these cases. And, if it was there truly no investigation? I mean, did nobody do anything about this? So I do the best I can essentially with what I have, but the parks, it's interesting that they don't want to talk about death in their parks, but they sure do want to sell these books. I mean, they all
And that's
carry them in their
interesting to me
bookstores.
because part of some of the places we went when we went on our little tour, it's because of the ghost. We did a ghost town tour, like the Loop down in
Uh-huh.
Arizona, and
Uh-huh.
because that's something that's an attraction for certain tourists. I mean, I say that because my daughter picked our route, and I mean, I enjoyed the trip too. But I know there's people that specifically would probably go to the park just for that, and
Mhm.
then there's also probably people that would be frightened and not want to go, like don't want to go outdoors because they're afraid something's going to happen. They're going to get eaten by a grizzly bear or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So I can
That
kind of see both sides of that with the National Park Service, with the NPS, and that was going to be one of my questions was how they're working with you on it. And so some are, some aren't, but they are selling the books.
oh yes.
Oh,
Yeah, these
interesting.
books, I actually just got my royalty statement today on for all of my books with this publisher. And yeah, these books sell quite nicely. So I'm happy that the park is benefiting from the work I've done. And I'm hoping that when I go back, it's 8 years since I wrote Death and Glacier. So in 2 years it'll be 10, and usually we do a second edition after 10 years. So I'm hoping that when I go back to Glacier that they'll be more accommodating the
Yeah.
second time around.
Yeah, hopefully. And with each park, you've already been to each one before you write the series, the book in the series?
Yes, I do my best to do that. In all of these, I have been to the parks. Um, and as part of the research, it's important to know what the terrain is like. I'm not going to pretend that I hiked up Long's Peak in Rocky Mountain, which is a 14,000 foot mountain. That's just not within my ability these days. But I certainly have researched pretty carefully, and I did speak to rangers and volunteers there who had done it to better understand what the obstacles are and why 75 people have died on that mountain. That's an extraordinary number of people. So it was important to really understand what that was like.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I'll get a letter from somebody or an email from somebody saying, this was a right turn, not a left turn. And I note that, and I'll, take that into consideration next time around. But okay.
Yeah, probably don't need to get too caught up in the weeds when we're reading a book, but then also it's nice if they're letting you know. And hopefully, if people are letting you know, they're being courteous about it too, because it sounds to me like you're just trying to help
Right.
somebody who wants to go to these places and also tell the story. I mean, that's something that needs to be documented. When you're telling the story and you talked about maybe there was no police investigation somewhere, are you kind of putting theories or hypotheses in there during those moments where there's nothing?
No, I'm really not.
Mm.
I am not personally um uh what's the word I want? I don't have the experience, the search and rescue experience to be able to guess what went wrong. But I will interview people who do know those things and allow them to say what the educated guess really is. Some of them it's quite obvious what went wrong, but some of them, when you have a very experienced hiker or climber or canyoneer who gets into some trouble in a place, then you really, you're getting into uh, where is the equipment failure, or what wrong move did he make, or did the boulder come out from under his foot, or what happened there. There's really no way to know. What we do know is that he fell 200 feet to his death. But people who actually do those kinds of sports are more than willing to talk to me about what they think went wrong. So there's quite a bit of that.
Yeah, in your research, you're kind of interviewing some of them as well. Somebody who maybe was a rock climber or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do some of that. I have, spoken to search and rescue people and to rangers, certainly. The unfortunate thing is that when there's an accident and one person dies and the other one survives, the survivor is really not willing to talk to me. They don't want to talk about this ever again. So I've had a lot of people turn me down for interviews, and that's fine. That's totally understandable that they don't want to relive this for what they may interpret as me trying to profit from their experience. That's not, that's just not I don't want to upset anybody, by doing this.
Right. And I mentioned thinking about dumb ways to die, and that is not what you're trying to do. You're not trying to capitalize on something like that.
No.
When we're looking at the way people die, what's the number one way that people are dying in national parks?
It's different for each park. Oddly enough, in Glacier, it's drowning. You would think it would be falling off of things, and there's a lot of that, and there's avalanches and so on. But mostly what we see are people who do not understand that the lakes and rivers and what they call creeks, that to me are raging rivers in Glacier, are fed by melting glaciers. So that water is just above freezing. You're talking about 34 degrees. You go into that water in a minute and a half, you're dead. So there are a lot of those. There's people, kids skipping across a creek, what's called a creek on rocks, but the creek is this rushing thing, and they slip, they get pulled into the river, and in, just a couple of minutes they're gone.
Wow.
So there's a lot of that, also a lot of lakes, people thinking they're going to take a swim by jumping off a boat, and discovering that Lake McDonald is just freezing cold and very deep. So we do see a lot of that. In other parks, like in Rocky Mountain, the biggest thing is mountain climbing, and and having a fall or getting injured and being stuck at the top of a mountain, um, or being struck by lightning is something we see a lot of in Rocky Mountain as well.
Wow.
But each park has a different hazard.
A different hazard. And lightning is one, like, what is the percentage of people that are killed by lightning? It's very small. But
Tiny,
if you're
yeah.
gonna hike that 14er, your chances increase.
Well, that's it. That high up in Rocky Mountain National Park, there's a lightning storm almost every day. At least in not so much in the winter, but spring, summer, fall, every day there's a lightning storm, and it's predictable. So when you're hiking Long's Peak, they want you to start well before noon or well before sunup, so that you're nearing the top of the park, or I'm sorry, the top of the mountain, uh, by late morning at the latest, because by 2 or 3 o'clock, we're going to have a lightning storm. So, and you don't want to be up there to be hit by lightning. You become the tallest thing in the park just by standing there. So that's something that's very well publicized if you're going to hike Long's Peak, that you got to start early, you got to be off the mountain by like mid-afternoon to avoid that. Well, a lot of people think that's nonsense. So they, so they go ahead and they start, 9 o'clock in the morning, and they get up there and it's 2 in the afternoon, and the next thing they know, there's a bolt of lightning, and they suddenly realize what they've done. So, and getting down from the mountain quickly at that point may not even be an option. So that's a thing that happens there.
That's one of the big ones. And
Yeah.
so I know a lot of my listeners love to be outdoors. A lot of them are hunters, and some of them don't hunt or get outdoors very much at all. But I think almost everybody that listens loves wildlife. And to whoever's listening to the show, if you want to correct me, please do. I'm always happy to hear from the listeners. But when you were talking about the grizzlies, is there very much conflict with the wildlife? I mean, is that a top cause of death, or no? Is it a small amount?
It's not a top cause by any stretch. Grizzly attacks are very few and far between. What happened in 1967 has a lot to do with a policy at Glacier and Yellowstone National Parks at the time, that they had these huge garbage dumps that everybody would just come and dump their trash into, and there's, the food they didn't eat and so on. And they set up bleachers so people would come and sit and watch the grizzly bears come into these dumps and chow down. This is like mind-boggling when you think about today's National Park Service. That kind of thing would never happen. So after these two young women died from bear attacks on the same night, they shut down all of these dumps and realized that they had habituated all of these animals to being around humans and seeing humans as a source of food. So that practice ended, and then there was a period of all of those bears that had been habituated to eating at the dumps every night started to die because they didn't know how to eat any other way. So this was sort of a pretty dark period for the Park Service. But since then, that's where the bear-proof containers come from, and the bear-proof trash cans, and all of the things that we see now that protect people and protect the bears from becoming habituated to people. So there are very few bear attacks at this point, and every time there is one, it makes world news. So, if you've heard about it, that's all there is. Other animals generally, well, the big thing is the buffalo in Yellowstone that people think are fluffy cows and think are domesticated and walk up to. The buffalo gores them. Uh, that's more about human foolishness than it is about the animal being dangerous. You keep your distance, the buffalo are just fine. They're not coming after you. So, there isn't there beyond that, there aren't a lot of animal attacks. You don't hear about people being attacked by deer or elk. There was one mountain goat, and I think it was Olympic, which I haven't written about yet, where this mountain goat just gored a guy on a trail. But that was really an individual case. So the animals are minding their own business, and we should do the same.
You just mentioned Olympic maybe being next on your list. Do you have a list going, like what your next projects are going to be, or is it as that your publishers are saying which one you need to do?
Well, sometimes they come up with them, but my editor right now is very willing to hear what my ideas are. And in all honesty, the one of the more deadly parks that I haven't written about yet is Death Valley, mostly because of heat. So that's a very different story from the mountainous parks. So I'm hoping to do that. It feels like a no-brainer, that we should be writing about the park with death in its name. So so I'm hoping that will be the next one, but we'll talk about that early next year.
Yeah. And have you already gone to Death Valley or you're going to
Yes.
add it? You've already been
Yeah.
there?
Yes. And yeah, it's big and flat with and ringed with mountains, so that the amazing thing about Death Valley is that you can be in the lowest point in the United States,
Right.
altitude wise, at Badwater Basin, and looking up at one of the highest points in California from there. So yeah, it's a really remarkable and beautiful place, but really idiosyncratic in terms of how you can get yourself killed there.
When you're thinking of doing that, what would be the best time of year? I mean, I'm thinking of when I would go there, but if for overall, is each park a different time of year when we should go, or is there a tourist season because that's when you should be there? And how do you kind of decide what time of year you're going to be at a certain place?
Well, people tend to travel in the summer because they have the time, and their kids are off from school and all those good things. But though the summer is often not the best time to go to a park, some of them have become so overrun with tourists that in the summer that they've had to institute shuttle buses or timed entry or things like that. So. Particularly the southern parks, you really October to April is the better time to go. I'm thinking Death Valley, Big Bend, Saguaro in Arizona, and Organ Pipe Cactus in Arizona. They're going to be beastly hot in the summer. But we were in Death Valley in March, and it was in bloom, which was really something to see. And it was about 80 degrees. It was really quite lovely and very much the what you would hope for in going to a national park. Um, some of the northern parks, you really do have to go in the summer. Glacier, in particular, the amazing Going to the Sun Road is only open from July to maybe the middle of September when it starts snowing again. So you really have to go there in the summer to get the full impact. Someplace like Yellowstone or Yosemite has something to offer all the whole year. So anytime you want to go, you're going to see something special.
Yeah, Yellowstone, I think you can rent snowmobiles and you can kind of do
Mhm.
different stuff like that. And
Yeah.
there's trails that they keep open on the north end, I think.
Yeah, I
And
think that's right. And they
yeah.
have the snow coaches also to take you through. And yeah, it's one of my dreams is Yellowstone in the middle of winter. We'll get there eventually.
We ended up in Yellowstone inadvertently in the middle of winter one year because GPS maps, and that's a totally different thing. Like the trouble that the maps cause, somebody could write books about that. But
Mhm.
our map took us to the bottom of Yellowstone, and it was taking us to a hotel north of Yellowstone in December, and it's like the road is not open. So
Oh, wow.
we
Wow.
didn't really pay attention to it till we were like, wait a second. We ended
Yeah.
up staying in the south end, and it was really fun. We got to see a lot of wildlife and stuff like that, but it just made me giggle because sometimes we depend a little too much on that technology.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a trap as well, especially if it gives out on you in the middle of something. So, yeah, that's important.
Definitely. So, when you've been out at parks, have you ever had anything that has been challenging to you? Have you had any experiences out there that you thought were kind of frightening?
Oh, sure. In particular, there is a hike in Big Bend National Park, which is at the very bottom of Texas. That there's a bird there that it's the only place in the United States that you can see it. It's called the Colima warbler, and I'm a huge birder. My husband is a bird photographer, so we undertook this hike up from 5,400 feet to 6,800 feet to find this bird. And we did everything wrong. I mean, it's incredible to me now how foolish we were on this hike. We each took a gallon of water with us, so we thought we had enough water. We did not. We ran out of water before we got to the top. So it was 3 hours back down with no water. We had, sweet and salty snacks with us that we didn't eat because we weren't hungry because of the heat. It was 100 degrees. I mean, everything we did was wrong. And the worst of it is we saw the bird, but we were so delirious by the time we saw the bird that we didn't even think to take a picture of it. So, so
Wow.
we put ourselves through this thing. And somewhere, this was the first time somewhere along the way that I ever thought I could die here. I mean, this could be bad. And luckily it wasn't that long a hike, and we got back, but it took me a good week to recover, to get my electrolytes balanced again, to be able to think clearly. It was very scary. I this was when I learned that dehydration can take you very, very fast.
Right.
That it's not 3 days without water. It could be a few hours before your head starts to swim.
Yeah, and that's something I think people don't understand is the 3 days without water is if you're in comfortable, not if you're in high heat or high altitude or super cold conditions. Because if you're just at a comfortable climate zone, you can go longer.
Right.
But something like that is very hard on your body and depletes your nutrients really quickly.
Yes, it sure does.
Yeah. And when you're looking at all the studying you're doing and the research and you're learning about the different ways people die, what do you think is one of the scariest ones? I mean, I think of hypothermia, heat exhaustion, stuff like that. I don't, to me, that's not frightening. I mean, it's terrible and it's tragic and it's probably pretty ugly, but is there anything that's super creepy or scary that you've heard about?
Um, Boy, that's an interesting question. Uh,
Maybe
well,
just the people
um,
who went missing and have never been seen again.
well, probably because heaven only knows where they are or what happened to them. And that is something, that's a whole different topic about people who just vanish without a trace. But one thing that I can't imagine the terror of is an avalanche. And that's on Mount Washington that I did a book about, even though that's a state park, but it's the highest mountain in, I want to say, yeah, well, at least in New Hampshire. It might be in New England. And um, avalanches are very common. And I can't imagine just seeing that wall of snow coming at you and being buried alive. I mean, that to me is the ultimate terror. There's a story about five young men in Glacier who decided to try to set a record for winter climbing a particular mountain on New Year's Day, and they hit an avalanche and they were all wiped out. So, but that's the thing, that whole buried alive concept and knowing what to do and what not to do to try to get yourself out. That's one of the things I put in both of those books of what to do if you're buried in an avalanche. And it depending on the weight of what's on top of you, you can survive. But you have to know what you're doing. And most of the very experienced mountain climbers do know what they're supposed to do, but some do not. And it's very often the last guy in the line that is buried without recourse.
That's that is probably the scariest thing too. I used to snowmobile a lot, and that was something that we always worried about. And some of our friends, they'd be like, "Oh, it's not going to happen," and you'd watch slabs of snow break free, and it's
Mhm.
like it definitely could happen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
thing is that the parks know when there's a danger of avalanche, and they have a rating system, and it's in the visitor center. So stopping first to make sure, or calling the hotline, they have hotlines for this, or looking it up on the website to make sure that you're going on a day when there's a low risk of avalanche. That's very important. So there are safeguards in place, but it's all about, making sure that you take advantage of all of these things that are out there to help you be safe. And if a ranger tells you don't go today, don't go today. It's that simple. When I give presentations about this, I talk about the false urgency of limited time, that idea that I'm only going to be in this park for 2 days. I may never come back here. I'd better do this, even though they're saying it's not a good day for it. I'm going to do it anyway. And that's unfortunately how you end up dead. So, that's what I say to people is, what if you don't go? You'll be disappointed, but you'll be alive. If a ranger's telling you no, don't do it.
That sounds like good advice to me, and I'm just kind of reflecting because I've been in places that I shouldn't have been, and it's like hindsight, it's like, why? And because the time thing, just what you're saying,
Right.
it's yeah, we could all probably reflect on that. Hopefully, people listening are probably thinking of moments that they've had, maybe on boats without life jackets. And I'm just
Mhm.
saying that because I was on one where the person who owned the boat was like, "Wait a second, I only have this many." Like one of them, somebody had either taken or it wasn't there, and so it was like, "Okay, well, it's okay, we'll go anyway. Nothing will happen." But what if something did happen?
Uh, That's it.
That's how we get these stories, is by that kind of an attitude. And I definitely, as I said, I'm using my own example because I'm guilty of like, yeah, let's just go ahead. It's all right. So,
Right, exactly, exactly. Now,
yeah.
there's one story that um, is easy to laugh at, but there's a man in Glacier who was taking pictures of a grizzly that was advancing on him, and he kept taking the pictures and he kept taking the pictures, and the uh, grizzly is coming right at him, and the last picture is, of course, the big grizzly, with his paws in the air, and it's like a perfect documentation of his own death.
Wow.
Yeah. Just how can you possibly not drop the camera and climb a tree at that point? But he didn't. He just kept shooting.
Wow. That
Yeah.
that one's kind of like that takes my breath away because I'm an outdoor writer too, and it's like you have to
Yeah.
have pictures for your articles, but I can't really see myself doing that.
No.
Um, I'm guilty of articles that I've written that I don't have images for, and it's like I'm calling friends, can I buy a picture? Because I need I
But
need
yeah.
an image. But that one's, I can see how people would do that just for a social media post. I mean, we talked about the buffalo. We've seen
Right.
stuff about that. So that's terrible,
Yeah, and
terrible stuff.
selfies are definitely, not so much in most of the parks that I've written about, but as as time goes on, you hear more and more stories about people, particularly for me, it was Acadia National Park, of people standing on out on rocks on the rocky coast of Maine, taking selfies of themselves with the big waves coming over from a hurricane that had taken place further south, and just a wave just grabbing them and taking them right into the ocean. Just the total lack of realization of what a dangerous position they've put themselves in to take a picture.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see a selfie of a dead person.
No, that's for sure.
Right.
And I'm laughing, but I shouldn't be laughing. That's just
But
the truth that, we don't want to see that. And
right.
so, thinking of pictures and whatnot, you're writing these books and you're going on the adventures. Can you tell us a little bit about the photography in the books?
Well, actually, these books don't have any photography,
Oh, okay.
except on the covers. Most of the covers were shot by my husband, photographer Nick Minetor, who has done the photography for all of our hiking books and our birding books. So there's plenty of that, and most of the hiking and so on that we do is here in New York State, where I live. We have done quite a number of books hiking waterfalls, hiking through history, hiking the Lower Hudson Valley, hiking the Catskills, all of these kinds of things. So there's a lot of photography there, but most of our national park photography ends up on our Facebook pages and in our social media.
Okay.
So far.
Well, it's neat that you have somebody to pal around with and go on adventures with. I think that's super super nice to have somebody to do that with. What is something that you would give someone as a tip for going to see national parks? What's your number one tip?
Oh, wow. It's the tip that Nick gave me back in 1992. Get out of the car.
Oh,
You
that's a good
know, I
one.
well, most you see people all over all the time, just seeing the entire national park through the windshield. So I have actually memories that are like a letterbox, that the top and the bottom are cut off because I'm just looking at it through the windshield. Get out of the car, take a hike, find a trail that's right for your skill level, whatever it is. There are easy trails, there are harder trails. Get out into the wilderness, have an interaction with nature, maybe see some animals. One of my favorite moments was when we were hiking in Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and two little kids suddenly came running up to us and yelled, "Do you want to see a really big spider?" We said, "Of course we do." So they brought us over to where their parents were guarding this really quite enormous spider that was on the side of a tree. It was impressive, but they were so excited. And that's the thing. You're not going to have an experience like that sitting in the front seat of your car. You got to get out and really see what you're there to see. And the other thing is, I've seen people stop at pull-offs, and rush out with their camera already in hand, or with their phone actually these days, and just, do a panorama of the what they're looking at, and then just get back in the car and never stop for 2 minutes to look at the view. So thinking, oh, I'll look at it at home. Like, but you're here and it's real,
Yeah, and
you
I would
know?
I would reiterate that as a tip is that the pictures never, even if it's the world's greatest photographer, the pictures never do it justice as what
No,
you see when you're there. And so if you stop and just take a breath and relax for a minute, and also it's great for your health. I mean, just to
right.
kind of connect with it. Even, I mean, you're not touching maybe the view, but you're connecting with it by being there. So I think that's a really good tip.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Have the experience not through a lens, but have it yourself. And it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And so we keep talking about these, all your books, and what I'm thinking is I used to do a book club, and then I've been too busy and I haven't been doing very good with my book club. But I'm thinking of maybe challenging my readers to read a few of these books. Can you tell us where we find them, and then in what order should we read them if that matters at all?
Yeah, the order is not that important, but that being said, Death in Glacier and Death in Rocky Mountain are probably the meatier ones because there's so many incidents there to talk about. But the books are available on Amazon and every other online book retailer. Whatever your favorite one is, you can find them there. If you just, want to Google my name, it'll take you to my Amazon author page, which will where you can see all of the books I've written that are available. So that would be probably the easiest way. You can also order them from your local bookstores.
Excellent. That's great. And then we can follow you on social media. I'll include some links
Oh,
to your contacts and stuff in the show notes. I always try to put those down there. Are there any other things that you like to mention before I let you go?
well, I am starting an email newsletter. So if you go to my website, you'll be able to sign up for that. And no, I mean, other than that, I think we've really covered it pretty nicely, Mia. I really appreciate you taking the time to delve into this topic.
Well, I mean, it to me, death isn't something that's fun to talk about.
Hmm.
And that's very much why I was curious what angle the books are taking. And uh, journalistic, I think, is probably good and more for reporting rather than entertaining. And obviously, you have to entertain to keep people reading.
Yes.
But there's all different styles of books. And I was going to ask you about the publishing, but you answered that immediately right away. So we already understood that. And I think it's important for my listeners to understand that because I think a lot of people, I have people, they're like, oh, you're a writer? Like, that's boring. Like, you don't do anything. And it's like, it's hard work.
Yes. Yes.
And you're doing a bunch of research and traveling. So I'm sure you get to have some fun adventures on along the way. What's your favorite park you've been to so far?
Boy, it is so hard to answer that, and usually it's whichever one we've just left. But I have a personal love of Zion National Park, where because when you go into Zion, you go in at the bottom of the canyon rather than at the top, like at the Grand Canyon. So you have this essentially 2,000 foot Vermilion hug around you. I mean, it's a bright, brilliant orange area. And with all the rock formations and the Virgin River running through there, and the fact that you can walk up the Virgin River for 3 miles and see slot canyons, which are really unique to Utah and Arizona, and something you really need to experience. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. The hiking is not that difficult. You can make it difficult. You can do canyoneering and climb up the 2,000 foot canyons, but it's not necessary. You can have a wonderful time there.
Absolutely.
Just
And
be careful.
thinking of that, I know it's probably been 5 or 6 years ago, time flies, but there was an issue in Zion with graffiti. Do you have I don't even know if you call it advice, but any instructions to people when they're going to these places and how they should respect the places?
Oh, absolutely. Leave them as you found them. There's no reason to mar a national park. There's nothing to be gained from that. You don't need to carve your initials into things. Just take pictures. The that old adage, take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints. uh there are beautiful places, and you want to leave them exactly as they are for the next person to enjoy, and you want to be able to come back and bring your children and your children's children to these parks. So
Exactly. That's
yeah.
super important. And I mean that goes for even if you're not in a national park. But in the national park, the NPS National Park Service, is there any tips on how to, I'm imagining you must have an annual pass. Do you have any
Mhm.
tips or advice for people as far as navigating the fees and entries to the parks?
Well, most of the parks are $25 to $30 for your car for a week. I mean, think about that. Think about you go to Disney World for a day, and if you for a family of four, it's going to cost you $1,000. You go to a national park for a week, and it's $30. So, really, there's not a lot there to deter you from doing that. You can buy an annual pass that I think now is $80. If you're doing a lot of traveling, that's going to pay off after two parks. So by all means, pick up the pass. And then if you're over 65, you can pick up for $80. You can pick up a pass that's good for you for the rest of your life.
Ooh,
It's the
wow.
best. Yeah, it is the best investment you will ever make in having fun in the United States. So, I highly recommend it. But yeah, other than that, it's really not an expensive proposition to visit the parks. If you stay in the parks, you can make your reservations. Usually you have to make them a year in advance for like the lodges in Yellowstone and Yosemite that are so beautiful. And Glacier has a wonderful vintage lodge as well. These were all built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s. They're beautiful. So it's worth it. It's just going to be a little bit pricey, maybe compared to, camping, which would be much less. But you do need to make your reservations way in advance to be able to get a decent room.
Yeah, and so that's my tip to you guys is we're looking at the next break would be winter break as far as extended vacation times. Leah and I went on our adventure for spring break in the springtime. And something that I will add to navigating the fees is Randy just mentioned that you pay a fee for a week. So we were able to go to Saguaro National Park and we were able to go to the Petrovite all in the same week under one fee. And so that's something I know I've had friends that are like, well, we went here and then we went there when they could have just paid one fee if you save your receipt. So don't throw the receipt away, save it until you're done with your trip.
Very good tip. Thank you, Mia. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so that's something that I hope people will share their adventures. Let us know. I mean, go follow Randy and let her know about your adventures out to national parks and such. And I thank you for joining me on the show. I know that definitely some of this is going to be educational to the listeners, and hopefully it encourages people to get outside rather than posting any discouragement about getting outdoors.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Mia. This was really a pleasure. It's always wonderful to talk with a kindred spirit.
Hey, this is Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, host of the Armed Lutheran Radio podcast, reminding you that the podcast you're listening to is a proud member of the Self Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great content at selfdefenseradio.net.